Shalom. Yesterday was the 21st yahrzeit for my mother, Esther Hare of blessed memory. It is hard to believe that so much time has elapsed. It is a simple observation that as we grow older, time at least seems to speed up. This can be anxiety-producing, but it can also be humbling. And it is with this sense of humility I offer these words in honor of my mother. For about 15 of the past 21 years, I've become increasingly involved with the discipline of Musar. Humility, anava in Hebrew, and honor, kavod, are two of the characteristics, or midot, that are part of the Musar toolkit. In the first, we seek to learn from all others in our lives so we can take our rightful place, not too much, but not too little, within our community. The second, kavod, has a sense of weightiness, of giving the other the respect that is their due. Thematically, I plan to focus on the relationship of a central teaching in the book of Leviticus, which we finished last week, to the discipline and practice of Musar. I'll return to Leviticus in a few minutes, but I first want to offer a definition and tell a brief story. When translated literally, Musar means correction or instruction, and over time it came to signify moral education more generally. Why would someone whose early spiritual life revolved around yoga and meditation, I loved hanging out in ashrams, and who re-engaged with Judaism through renewal and its neo-Hasidic teachings of joyful prayer and action, be attracted to such a seemingly puritanical practice? Please humor me while I digress. There is a teaching story in the yogic tradition about a yogi who went to live on a mountaintop to meditate in solitude. After a number of years, he attained enlightenment, or at least he thought he had, meaning that he saw himself and the universe as all one. Our yogi left his mountain and went to the market in a nearby village. Somebody stepped on his toes. Our yogi shouted and berated the poor villager. An observer suggested to the yogi that he go to the home of a nearby teacher because he was not displaying the equanimity of one who was fully enlightened. And to his credit, the yogi had the humility to realize that this is true. So perhaps these paths are not so different after all. One thing they have in common is the focus on being mindful when in relationship with others, even those with whom we have just a passing interaction. Thus, Musar can best be described as a Jewish path of ethical mindfulness grounded in love for the other. This is not to be confused with othering to sow divisions, but to understand the other as our neighbor. Before unpacking this a little more, I want to address another concept with a more personal story. One of the most misunderstood concepts in Musar is that of Yetzer. Literally, Yetzer is an inclination. Other ways of looking at the Yetzer is as desire, or as Rabbi Scott put it in our conversation earlier this week, as a fundamental drive. Our Yetzer is part and parcel of our human nature. Tradition divides the Yetzer into the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and the Yetzer HaTov, the inclination to do good. In Musar practice, we do Heshbon HaNefesh, reflection or accounting of the soul, of the state of our soul, so we can damp down the Yetzer Hara and increase the Yetzer HaTov. But what exactly is the Yetzer Hara? Rabbi Ira Stone, in whose program I received my training, defines the Yetzer Hara as self-absorption and the Yetzer HaTov as service to others in our lives. But in truth, taking care of ourselves is not a bad thing. We need to have a healthy sense of self to build healthy relationships. And I know we got a lot of therapists here, so to be careful. It is when we do not see the other because we are so wrapped up in ourselves that there is an entryway for Ra, what we're calling evil energy. For years, I have found that certain midot creep up and do not show me in my best light. This fall, as Yom Kippur approached, I found myself falling into one of those disagreements, arguments, that rear their ugly heads in some marriages, maybe not yours. Thinking I was done with the level of impatience and lack of deliberation of my words that I was showing to my dearest other, I felt like a Musar failure. Here I was teaching Musar, but I was repeating an old pattern during these 10 holiest days of our year, no less. Through Havruta, or work with a partner, I realized that I was letting my desire for having a perfect holiday in perfect harmony with my partner was creating undue anxiety within myself. To use a familiar adage, perfection was now the enemy of the good. I also realized that this voice urging me towards perfection was actually the Yetzer Hara in disguise, telling me I'd never be good enough. Rather, when I'm more compassionate to both myself and to one with whom I'm interacting, I can be more mindful and listen more closely to what we really need to communicate. In fact, in recent iterations of Musar theory and practice, our focus has been on maintaining a soul-to-soul connection or neshama-to-neshama connection with others, rather than considering our actions in a binary of Ra and Tov, which in a roundabout way brings me to Leviticus 19. At the heart of the Torah, in the middle of the 5 books of Moses, is the command, love your neighbor as yourself. So far, everything I've said has been pretty touchy-feely. In many ways, though, Musar is a corrective to our culture of comfort and the consumerism associated with self-care. Not all of it, but there is certainly that consumerist thing out there. However, we do live in a difficult time which requires a gentler approach to Heshbon HaNefesh than was reportedly the case in the Lithuanian yeshivot associated with the spread of Musar in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Those were difficult times too, but in our post-Holocaust world, a practice based on reward and punishment theology wouldn't cut it for me, and I think most of you would agree. Still, I do have to tell you now that Musar requires obligation. Rabbi Simcha Zissel of Kelm, a leading 19th century Musar teacher, believed that when we learn to love our neighbor by carrying their burden with them, he saw this as the essential way to acquire Torah. Rabbi Joshua Bediger, a graduate of the Reconstructionist College, who is currently Rosh Yeshiva of the Center for Contemporary Musar, shared this story in a recent issue of Evolve. I remember Rabbi Ira Stone coming as scholar in residence to our shul, and one congregant saying, in effect, I love what you were teaching here about Musar, but I'm struggling with the language of obligation and burden. Is there a way to soften that language or to find other words? And I remember Stone responding kindly but firmly, no. Who exactly are we obligated? Who is our neighbor? Rabbi Shai Held, in his book, Judaism About Love, is one of many commentators who parse out several layers of neighborliness, from people who we are close to, like spouses, children, parents, best friends, through our various community, and so on. Another set of ideas deepens this concept. Also central to Musar is the idea that we are all created in the image of the divine. In fact, in order to bring Musar into line with post-Holocaust thinking, Rabbi Stone has leaned heavily on the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas, a French Holocaust survivor who placed ethics at the forefront of being human. And there's a whole literature out there about why this is so radical, but for our purposes, to Levinas, the trace of the divine is seen in each face, and that trace obligates us to be awake to their needs. As my colleagues have written, Levinas teaches that love your neighbor as yourself means that my neighbor is like me, but not me. The face of the other calls out to us, a burden to be attended to, and commands us to say, Hineni, here I am for you. Practically speaking, how does this sense of obligation work? Are there restrictions or limitations? Well, sometimes it's easy. Rushing to shul, I might rush into the parking lot and discover that half my car is over that white line. I gotta take the time to fix it so that I maintain the order, which is another midah. Other things are more complicated. We are enjoined to be generous, but if your inbox is like mine, how do you make decisions about who to be generous to and how much? And speaking of generosity, sometimes we are in truly difficult situations. Someone may ask us directly for money, and we care deeply about that person, but we have to figure out if this is a reasonable request. And then, on the outer circles of our loving embrace of humanity, there are numerous examples of bad behavior. In those instances, it makes sense to create loving bonds with those harmed by this behavior, while hoping, or perhaps if this is your practice, even praying for the oppressor to do their own teshuvah or change of heart. We just talked about the obligation to love our neighbor through bearing their burdens with them. But how do we love ourselves? One of the main obstacles to healthy self-love, as opposed to the self-absorption I mentioned earlier, is a feeling that we are incomplete, often causing us to compare ourselves to others. As Shai Held points out, created in the image of God, we are infinitely valuable. No individual comparison should be able to take that away from us. So I've been talking for a long time now. So I ask you to join me in a very brief exercise. One opening for a self-love that makes space for others is gratitude. I ask that you take a few slow, deep breaths. Check in with yourself that you're sitting comfortably. Maybe your feet should be flat on the floor. If you wish, you can close your eyes. Now bring to mind something for which you're grateful. It isn't necessary to bring something big to mind. It could be something pretty you saw outside, or a piece of music you heard. Now, take half a minute just to hold that in your mind. You could open your eyes if they were closed. From this space of gratitude, look to your right. Look to your left. These are your neighbors. Mentally, wish them well. Before we end, I want to take a moment to bring our talk from Leviticus to our new book of the Torah, Bamidbar. Today's parsha begins with God's command to take a census of the Israelite people. And the Musar teacher, Rabbi Avi Fertig's commentary on this parsha, he points out that the counting and division of the camps is carefully orchestrated to balance the individual with the greater community. It isn't always easy to determine when to focus on our individual needs, as well as family and work obligations, or those of our larger community, or even on society. While we are all obligated to serve each other, we don't need to all serve in the same way. Even if our service at times is simply listening or expressing appreciation. Hopefully, the resulting strengthening of bonds with others in our lives will give us the strength to meet the larger challenges of our time. Thank you so much for taking this journey with me today. Shabbat Shalom.